This is a different episode than usual. You built the company up from 0 to 7 figures in revenue without taking $1 of institutional funding.
Month one was crazy. I did not have enough in my bank account. I got over $1,000 in parking tickets. My car was broken into, $1,000 camera stolen. My tire burst on the highway. My brothers came to stay over and I couldn't buy them food because I was also thinking about the bills that I had to pay. I was kind of going into it with a long timeline and the expectation that, this might very much just fail.
All right, this is a bit of a different episode than usual because as of this week, I'm announcing that I am now a co-owner in Founders Arm, which, as you will come to hear about in the episode, is a recruitment firm for startups. We work with some of the fastest growing startups and consumer apps in the space to help them hire entire teams of marketing assistants, biz dev talent, and engineers. If you want to read the full launch, go to foundersarm.com/hello. Rayan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So a little over a year ago, you had just dropped out of college after working on nonprofits for the last couple of years. And you dropped out of college to build Founders Arm, which is a recruitment firm for startups. And I'm sure you can explain a little bit better as to what it does. There's this whole story of how you moved to SF without having enough money to pay for rent. And, you built the company up from 0 to 7 figures in revenue without taking $1 of institutional funding. And a lot of that story has kind of been talked about on LinkedIn, but there are some other parts now that we're going to talk about today. But to even zoom back, how did we get here?
Oh man. Well, we became friends from a friend of a friend because we also worked at the same nonprofit at different periods of time. And so I didn't know what startups were. I had moved to the US in 2019, lived through COVID, moved to California. And then it's Silicon Valley, San Francisco startups. And so I was not aware of that at all. And so when I heard that, hey, one of my friends has this friend who's 19, 20, working in startups, in SF, all big shot, this, that. I was very intrigued to say the least. And then we met and then we kept meeting.
Where did we meet initially?
I'm not even sure.
It's probably the masjid.
Yeah, it's probably the masjid. And so we just started hanging out, and then around that time you had surgery. And so you were just kind of stuck in the house, in your garage all day. And so we would just pull up every single day. And at one point it was 4 days out of the week. And through that, we just kind of started talking about different things. I had a bit of insight into kind of, how startups were working and kind of your work on a day-to-day basis as well.
Yeah, because you would just sit there and listen to all my calls.
Yeah, and it was, and I was it's not rocket science. It's pretty much the same thing. And that's kind of when my eyes opened and I was okay, there's consumer apps, there's YouTube channels, this is how marketing works, et cetera, et cetera. And that was around when I still had 3-4 months of college left. And I was starting to think more about, hey, I have not studied at all for my degree and I have no idea what I'm going to do afterwards. And so that's when the cogs in my brain started working.
And, we basically spent most of December, I was at my parents' house locked in because I just had that surgery. And so we were, you'd come over and you'd work on these random projects and, I'd just be doing work, my normal work. And then in February, I basically go to Umrah, right? For those who don't know, it's a trip that Muslims do. You go to Saudi Arabia, you go see Mecca, Medina, or I guess Omar really is just going to see Mecca. And it was my first time ever going to Saudi. And this is around the time Sync Labs had come out, which was the wave to lip model where you can upload a video of me speaking in English and it'll dub it to my voice in Japanese. It'll make my lips look like I'm actually talking in Japanese. And this was the first vacation on that trip that I'd taken. And so I had a lot of ideas that were kind of coming in and out. But I just remember leaving Saudi and I was wow, this is some of the best, the most wholesome interactions I'd ever had at that point. And, I had an assistant that I worked with at Founders Inc. that we had sourced from Algeria before Founders Arm was even a thing. And that was a huge unlock. And I just remember thinking on the flight home that this whole hiring, it's going to change forever because there are now this I don't even know how to explain it. It was the bar for how much a single person could do regardless of their background, where they live, what language they speak, just got so much higher because of AI. And I remember I called you, basically my first call after I got off the plane from Doha, because I had this idea of okay, there's something to be done here in the space of finding people overseas, teaching them how to use ChatGPT, helping them get jobs at startups. But I'd also promised myself that I wouldn't take any calls while I'm on this like Omar trip. And then I get off the plane, and I'm in Doha, I'm like waiting in my layover, and I called you, and I was like, yo, I have this idea. And what was it from your perspective?
I was still new to the startup space, so a lot of what you were saying just seemed like such big picture stuff. But I had done enough stuff and random side projects over the last 10 years to the point where I understood what a good business model was and what a good business model wasn't. So when I heard that, I was doing the mental maths of how this would work as a company and how the financials would work. And I was like, okay, this is definitely something that would work long term, and this is something that's scalable. And I was like, I'm in, because what was the worst that could happen? That was a conclusion that I had come to in my head right during that call as well, that the worst thing that could happen, I started going to San Francisco, get a lot of exposure, leverage that failure into the other thing. So I was kind of going into it with a long timeline and the expectation that, oh, this might very much just fail.
Which is the right way to think about it. And then what happened, right? So like at this point, it's February of 2024, maybe March of 2024. Yeah. And then what?
I was paying my own tuition because I was working working at the masjid and also doing the nonprofit stuff. And for me, my heart just wasn't in college. And I was like, okay, do I just want to keep paying for it, or should I just drop out, go full all in on this, and then just worry about college later? I didn't even call anyone from the college up. I just deleted my email off the laptop. And I was like, hey, you know what? That'll take care of all of my issues. I will revisit this at another time. And since then, I haven't logged into that email yet. And so I didn't tell anyone about it. I told my mom. My mom was the only person who knew. And yeah, we got going from there.
Yeah, and then, I think at that point we were like, how do we structure this? And because I knew that I couldn't build a company at that point. I was fully locked in on Founders Inc. and I just started thinking about like taking Aleph as like a thing again. So instead, I think we were like, I'm just going to invest in whatever this turns into, and you're going to kind of build it, and like I'll be here as a friend to like, guide you along the way. And how did you make your first, like, where did the first customers come from?
It was your podcast. It was this podcast. Because I remember when you first started, there were a couple of different things that we needed to do. One was, okay, if you're selling to everybody, you're selling to nobody. And also there has to be a certain level of differentiation when it comes to what your company is going to be about. And so when we tried going for the angle of for startups, one thing that we were very specific about is, okay, why don't we target specifically startups? And at that point, I didn't have a LinkedIn or Twitter. And so I was manually finding emails because I didn't know Apollo was a thing either, which people may call me stupid for, but I just didn't know. And so it was a use case of, okay, let's just go to the Omar Waseem podcast. Let's go to Starter Story. Let's go to My First Million podcast. And so every single day for the first 2 or 3 months, I would go to these YouTube podcasts. I would have a Excel sheet. I would manually import every single email, find their domain, guess the names, put it into an Excel, and then manually send email one by one by one by one. And and then our first reply was actually Dylan from Evergreen from your podcast.
You're saying your first customer kind of came from the podcast through that. And I remember actually you came to the hotel next to my house, and we would work out of the lobby there sometimes on the weekends. And you had this like really funny email, which we'll try to find and put it up on the screen. But it was like, what if someone hit you with a bus tomorrow, right? Like,
can I clone you? That was the one that worked very well.
What was it?
The subject was, can I clone you? Because the idea was that we were finding assistants who could essentially integrate into a founder's life, take care of all of the things that they don't want to take care of. And so it's essentially cloning. And it was funny because a lot of people took it as AI agents.
Oh, I remember.
And I was so confused. I was like, wait, what do you mean that exists?
Yeah.
And then I had to explain that, oh, this is actually humans.
I remember I would make intros for you as far as like, some people in my network would come and say, hey, you have an assistant. How do I get an assistant? I'd be like, oh, go talk to my friend Rayan. He's doing this thing. I might invest. And they would immediately think that you were selling them an AI assistant. And they'd be telling me like, hey, do you really think the tech's good enough for this right now? And I was like, what do you mean is the tech good enough? It's just ChatGPT. Because I didn't fully understand that they were thinking it was an AI assistant at that point. But okay, the first, as usual, which is the case with a lot of startups, your first couple of customers came from cold outreach, manual outreach. What was the V2?
When you told me to get a Twitter and I just didn't understand what that meant, I thought it was good from like a hey, like get integrated into the SF sort of bubble to kind of see how things work. And then I started posting more and more right when I decided to move to SF.
Right. And this is when I was like ghostwriting a lot of like helping you like ghostwrite a lot of your posts early on, like the first few. Interesting. And how did that do?
It went well. I just started with photo dumps and just posting stuff that I had seen other people do, including yourself. Where, for example, like you posted on Friday, like Friday dump or like casual Friday. Or
I'd be like Friday nights at Founders Inc. That was my thing last year. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me, it was just like, okay, like leading up to SF, just like posting a couple days before. Then it was a series of like, hey, today I'm moving to SF that got a couple hundred followers from the get-go, which I now realize is actually pretty big, considering like how tough Twitter is to break into. And then I just started the series like, oh, SF week 1, SF week 2. And, you know, I'm not building anything in software, but just sharing personal insights. And that was kind of like the first version of like when I learned to, like, you know, post online and write.
Yeah, because I remember we'd go to like a different cafe every couple of days in the first few months, and we would just sit there and we'd go over like, oh, here's how the tweets are performing. Oh, the pictures are doing really well. We should keep doing the pictures. That feels like so long ago.
Yeah.
And then was that around the time where you made your first hire, or were you still doing a lot of the sourcing manually?
Oh man, I did around 6,000 interviews in the first 6-7 months of the company, because there was a certain level of, okay, like there's a certain level of delegation that you can't offload to someone else until you know yourself how to do it.
By interviews, do you mean that you were doing the calls, or you were like looking over each candidate?
Looking over each.
Okay,
candidate.
I was gonna say there's no way we did 6,000 interviews in the first 4 months, just from a time perspective.
Oh no! Oh, 6,000 candidates. Right? Yeah. 6,000 candidates.
Interesting. And like during this time, again, you had never worked on a startup before, right? It was all like nonprofits and random side projects, and so you're kind of like trying to build the plane as you're flying it in terms of like, oh, what does someone actually want? What does a good assistant mean, et cetera?
Yeah. And the really interesting thing about this is that one of the lessons that I learned from that is that you really do need to understand the game that you're trying to play, because software is very iterative and it's very like quick, like ship an update in 2 days and then get feedback immediately of whether something works or it doesn't work. With service-based industries, because you're providing a service, our data points and feedback loops were actually spread across 1 to 2 months. And so we'd make a placement and then we'd have to wait 1 or 2 months to see whether that was actually going well, what the feedback was from the client, how to improve our sourcing. So it was definitely the longer game that we had to play.
And then once you're at a point where you kind of have a good grasp on, how to actually decide that a candidate would be good for a startup, where did you go and find more startups from?
Mm-hmm. A lot of it was word of mouth. And one of the things that we realized is that startups either optimized for volume, and then as they optimized for volume and their business grew very quickly, they suddenly needed other hires as well. And that's kind of when we started transitioning from V0 of Founders Arm, which was just virtual assistants, to marketing assistants or business talent or engineers, right? Because there's different components of your business. And as one area of the business grows, the other areas where they need help with as well. And that's kind of when we started thinking more about, full stack hiring and hiring for other positions as well.
And so at this point now you like have your niche and you kind of have your system solidified around like posting on LinkedIn, posting on Twitter, et cetera. What was like the next tipping point for the company?
I would say September. So this was just after summer. We had onboarded a couple of consumer apps, a couple of edtech companies, a couple of startups that are now, venture backed, a couple of AI agent companies, and as well as some agencies. And so the companies that we were working with were diversified enough to the point where we had different use cases and case studies now, and we had seen enough feedback as to what was working, what wasn't working. And around that time, I had hired my first assistant, who actually started off as my personal assistant, and then over time morphed into our head of recruitment.
It feels like that happens a lot, right? Where you hire someone for one purpose and then you realize over time that they kind of grow into another more important role over the company. What was it like for you to go from someone that had never worked a real job, like in startups or in tech, to then having to hire and manage and do all of that?
This is probably one of the biggest achievements when it comes to like hiring offshore and delegating, because essentially what I've done is that I've used Founders Arm to build Founders Arm. And what I mean by that is hiring someone offshore training them, integrating them into my company from a systems and workflow perspective, and how to actually give feedback to someone, train someone, and then have them run a part of the company to help grow the company. And that's exactly what we're doing at the other clients that we have as well. In our case, what that was our head of recruitment. This entire company is supply and demand. I could go out and get demand by writing on LinkedIn and Twitter and getting more clients and word of mouth. And then the supply part was the actual recruitment side. And so the assistant that I'd hired was from Morocco. She speaks incredibly good English, very tapped into Gen Z culture. She's still in college, she's 22. And there was just something about her, like what I saw in her and the reason why I hired her, excellent people skills. And that passion like still comes out today. Every single client that has talked to her, they've been like, hey, we need a khulud. Like, can you find someone like khulud? And one of them has even jokingly said, hey, can I hire you? And so like under the radar tried poaching her from us, which is insane. But yeah, that was kind of the proof for me that, okay, there's definitely a model here where we can take young people who have lots of untapped potential, pair them up with, these startups that are looking for hungry young people who are looking to learn. And then that's kind of a win-win-win solution for both the client, me, and also our candidates as well.
I think like around that time is also when I remember looking at your P&L, and I was like, oh, a lot of like the companies that you hire, they hire one person from you and then they hire 3, 5, 7. At that point, I think it was only like 7 was the max anyone had hired. Yeah. Was that something that you like tried to create, or did that just happen organically?
It happened organically, but we have, but I think now as we kind of tap into more roles and we're building those funnels out, it's going to be a much larger ecosystem as well over the next year or so that we're trying to build out.
Yeah, because like a lot of companies now, they think about how to go really wide with the number of customers they have, and they end up leaving like a lot of money on the table because there's like infinite opportunities within each of their customers to just create a lot more revenue generating opportunities with those individual customers. And like, now that, we're kind of going down this route of me taking a larger part or like me playing a larger part in the company, I've gotten to look through a lot of like, like the fund documents on profit, loss, and a lot of the, a majority of the revenue, I would say, comes from a few companies that pay large amounts of money for tons of people versus like the approach of trying to start an agency and getting like 30 clients, right? Yeah. And I think like from the agencies that I've like invested in or worked on basically since I was 16, that usually is what ends up happening. And and people don't realize that like most agencies have like 3 or 4 clients that pay for 80% of the revenue. And then the remainder of them are opportunities where, you either get relationships or you start relationships hoping that those people then go on to become larger, clients down the line. So now if we were to fast forward to like December, right? Because to me, that's when I started seeing like from my head, I was like, wow, this guy that lives with me is like doing something that's like really cool. Which I think is actually a funny point that we didn't even mention. When you moved to SF, you moved into a house with me and 2 other people that are like, my friends.
Yeah.
And like, what was that process like of moving to San Francisco for the first time?
More of an internal philosophy, but I think life is just about how many artificial environments of pressure you can create for yourself and come out the other end a better person. And so version 1 of that for me was dropping out with a month left because I just knew that's the type of pressure I needed to operate. And then version 2 of that was actually moving to SF. I did not have enough in my bank account. Month 1 was crazy. I still I got over $1,000 in parking tickets. My car was broken into, $1,000 camera stolen. My tire burst on the highway. My brothers came to stay over and I couldn't buy them food because I was also thinking about the bills that I had to pay. And it was also around that time where I wasn't taking it as seriously because when you first move to SF, it's like, oh, wow, look at this guy who started an agency, just moved to SF. Like, oh my goodness.
It got to your head.
Yeah. It's like all the fake praise. And then you kind of people max as well in terms of like networking events and meeting people. And so that was kind of month 1 of SF. We had a really tough conversation, and that's when that was a really turnaround moment for me.
What was that tough conversation?
It was just, I think a lot of people come to SF and they play pretend, and they like grift online on social media, lie about numbers, etc. And whilst I didn't lie, there was definitely a case of like, okay, like what people's praise and what they say can definitely get to your head. The end of that month was very tough. So yeah, but then ever since then, that was
that was a rock bottom.
Yeah, rock bottom. And the month after that, it was just like lock myself in a room for like 12 to 14 hours a day and just like work. And the funny thing is, half the time I didn't even know what I was going to do. I was just sitting behind a laptop and I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do, but I just need to stick at it. And I think people overestimate how much they need to know the next step and underestimate how much time they can just throw at an issue, and eventually they will reach a solution.
Yeah, and it felt like, there were like 3 major phases of the company. The first turning point was when we sat down in June and I was like, dude, your entire calendar is empty. What have you been doing all day? And that was like a big turning point. Yeah. Then there was like, December, which I guess we can talk about in a second here. And then there's like recently, like in the last like 2 or 3 months. But talking about December, right? I remember we went to Tahoe. Yakuba was there, Ayush was there, Zach was there. And we had this like little internal like, okay, let's set our goals for the year. We got like this really nice cabin on the water. Yeah. We did not go skiing, unfortunately. All our friends were making fun of us because they were like, these dudes rented like a kid, spent all that money driving out to Tahoe and renting a cabin just to not go skiing once. But I think that was like probably like the highlight of the last year, right? Because we were in that cabin, we were trying to figure out like, okay, here's what's happening with the company. Here's where we want to take this in the next year. Because that's like around the time where I stepped in like more seriously. And like when you reflect on December, like what was happening in that month?
We had just hired our second person. I had hired her to be my executive assistant. And just like you mentioned earlier, she transitioned more to a social media based role. Because at that time, something that we didn't see coming is like what I say about supply and demand. Demand was good. Supply side, we had like 10,000 followers on LinkedIn just there, simply because we'd been running campaigns. And so we had this large ecosystem of talent. And I was like, okay, now we got to take supply very seriously over the next like 6 months, because this is when some of our larger clients, they suddenly just dropped a message and they're like, hey, we need like 10 more assistants this month. And I'm like, I'm just a 1-person team. Like, I don't know how to. And that was kind of like a really big push for us, where we were working every single day, just sourcing people around the clock, trying to find the best people. So yeah.
And that's where you kind of like automated at that point, a lot of the posts on LinkedIn, Twitter, they were still being written by you. And what I think from what I remember, the biggest problem at that point was the lack of consistency, because you kept getting dragged into, recruiting and trying to like fill all the fires on the supply side.
Yeah.
And so then you brought in Myrna, like the person who kind of runs marketing at Founders Arm right now, to basically like become your ghostwriter, right? And like post content for you, but then also start posting content on the Founders Arm account to start, building that out. And when you were sitting there in December, like what were the goals that you were trying to set for this year?
There's 2 goals. There's monetary goals, which of course I want to hit, but then there's larger goals. One of the pre-existing notions that I had was, I don't want to be an agency. I very much want to be a company, because I had seen the other companies out there from a recruitment perspective, and all of them had gone into, 12 million, 20 million, 30 million. One person even went through a 50 million exit. And I believe that our product is better than them. So it was just, how do we break out of this mold of an agency and kind of go beyond? And a big part of that was solving the supply side. Supply side meaning, how do we get more candidates, train them, have an unlimited supply of like the best talent to arm startups with. And then on the monetary side, I don't want to say what they are, but I feel like we've gotten pretty close to kind of what we set out to do. And I remember we sat in a room. It was like a 3-hour session. Both of us just like, there was a bed. For some reason, we sat on the floor with a white with like 2 Notion pages open, and it was like Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, and then planned it out like month by month. And even though some of those finer details have changed, the overarching goals are still there, and we have achieved some of them.
And like, what is it then? You say, you believe that Founders Arm is a better product than some of the other things on the market. What is it that makes, and I guess for context, it's also one of the businesses I've seen of all the other startups I've looked at where the churn is tremendously low, right? And it's like, what is it about the candidates or the process that makes Founders Arm special?
It's exactly what you said. It's about process. We created a very rigorous funneling system where we optimize for as much volume as possible per week, and then have a very rigorous like a funnel system where we optimize for hearing their English before we ever grant someone an interview. So before we ever even interview someone, we're listening to their English and seeing how well they carry themselves and present themselves. So within the first 10 to 15 seconds, someone on our team can make a judgment whether this person is good or not. Because again, they are working with US-based clients. Another big thing was the region. A lot of people anchor onto their past beliefs or experiences of what offshore recruiting looked like. So a lot of people, they go to Southeast Asia, hire people out of there. We wanted to do something different. So we realized that there was a gold mine of talent in Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, that part of the world that was actually much more optimized for the US time zone as well, because US clients also want to work with people that are on their own time zone. And a lot of these countries already have offshore experience of working with European countries. So it's kind of like a win-win-win on all fronts. And now what that looks like is we, on average, screen around 10,000 resumes a week. And then we have around 80 interviews per week. And then we have like talent pools that we'll send to all of our clients. And so a lot of companies gimmickly say top 1% of talent. For us, statistics wise, it actually is the top 1% of talent.
And then where do you go from here, right? You're saying you want to be a company. You're saying you don't want to just be an agency. You clearly have like the funnel working in that you have new people coming in every day who want to hire talent. You have even more new people coming in every week that want to get hired as new talent. We have had some very interesting meetings in the last month with like countries, right? But like outside of that, like where do you think like Founders Arm is supposed to go from here?
The interesting thing is we don't know, but whatever it is, it could be so powerful, because even if you just stick, like, let's take AI out of it. If you just stick to humans and the capacity of the people that we found, the caliber of talent, any startup can hire engineers, business, marketing talent, and build their entire backend team with us and do every function that they're supposed to. I mean, we have like Series A backed startups with us, and their entire backend business operations are built with us. We have some of the biggest consumer apps who have a team of 20 people who run marketing around the clock with us, with our hires. And then we have some of the biggest edtech, fintech, et cetera companies who hire through us as well. And so just from a human perspective, we're good if we can just scale that up. But then what becomes interesting is how AI enables learning and workflows so much more efficiently. Even internally, right? We use some AI platforms and automations to build our systems out. What if every single hire in the future came equipped with that and they were given to a startup?
And then, a lot of people post really bad content on LinkedIn. I'd say like, for some reason, the last like 2 months, everyone I follow on Twitter, it's like split up evenly, and they are currently in Monaco. Yeah. They are currently in the marina, or they're posting really bad AI generated content on Twitter.
Yeah.
So what is it that is different about your content, like that makes you not fall into the bucket of posting really bad AI content?
Yeah. How do you bring people into the most condensed version of your story? I feel like everyone's trying to tell a story. What is that story for you? I moved around so many times growing up. I dropped out of college. There's a very clear sequence of events. And so whenever I look at that, it almost feels like I can tap into any part of my life and relate it to where I am today. And that's from how I think about it in my mind. When it comes to the actual technical parts of it, I actually used AI in the beginning. And I would, this was before I knew what startups were. Farza's writing was a big inspiration, because I would just get emails from this guy and I was like, I have no idea what build space is, but I like the way he writes. And so
I just signed you up to a bunch of email lists.
Yeah. And then I got a bunch of emails and I was like, okay, let me start practicing this way. And then suddenly I started using Hemingway to write, and then other AI tools, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was just like an insane amount of reps. And I don't really think about them anymore. I just post whatever I feel like is the most authentic thing to me. And I just post. And so even though I may not have the most amount of followers, right? Everyone thinks of me as a human, because at the end of the day, people buy from humans.
And like the biggest thing I feel like as far as like unlocks for people who are selling on Twitter or LinkedIn go, like the single biggest unlock has been Hemingway, right? Okay, and this isn't sponsored. We have no affiliation. I wish we owned them. But Hemingway app, right? Hemingway editor, or like Hemingway, just search Hemingway writer. What it does is it takes like whatever you write, you kind of upload it to their text editor, and it will rank it based on like what grade level you're writing at. Yeah. If you can write like a 5th grader, or you can write like a 6th grader, that means that all of the words that you're saying are like easily digestible. The problem is people start trying to like write with super big words to seem super smart. They start using words like delve, and suddenly it's like you read it and you kind of have to like think 3 times before writing it. I've found that like the writing that does the best on LinkedIn and Twitter is like just write like you talk, right? Because at least then the people that know you, they read it and they're like, yeah, that sounds like something he's saying. And it's just a lot more easy to build a connection with your audience. And I even remember like the stark difference of before and after you started using like Hemingway. I was like, oh, this is actually like a great tool.
Yeah.
And then like, how did it feel when you finally broke that like 1 million kind of like ARR mark? Because I know like for you, that was like something that you were like, that was like a milestone that you wanted to hit of like 1 million ARR in my first year.
We're just getting started. I say this multiple times across my posts, but I've failed a lot in my life. The moment I become complacent is the moment things start falling off. And if anything, the bigger something gets, the bigger your eyes get on kind of what the next milestone is, and it's even bigger. I think people underestimate how much more leverage you have to build something even bigger once you achieve something, once you get to 1. Level 1 is just the start. Like getting from level 0 to 1 is like, that's where you suffer the most. And then once you're at level 1, that's kind of where you set your eyes on the big prize, and then you work twice as hard. And taking it a layer deeper, that's kind of when you tap into your network and the people you surround yourself with as well. That's very important.
And so now like shifting into personal life for a little bit, right? Because your life has changed a lot in the last year since you moved out to SF. What has like that been like, right? To go from, you lived with your parents, right? You moved a lot around growing up, and then you ended up in SF with a bunch of my friends in a house.
Yeah.
What was that like? What were your initial reactions? Like, what was your initial kind of like response when you moved out here?
I genuinely believe that month 1, I experienced everything bad there was to experience. And I just got it all out of my system. And the last 11 months, I've just kind of been in my own bubble.
What do you mean by everything bad?
The networking events or the too many networking events, people maxing, hanging out with people, talking shop about business, AI, whatever. Because
Do you think that's a bad thing? Or do you think you were with the wrong crowd?
I think I was with the wrong crowd because I'm also building in a different industry as well. And so if you're building in AI and you have a real passion for that, there are really cool people to meet around SF. But for me, all of the work and the results that I was looking for was in the work that I had to achieve. Because again, in going from 0 to 1, I am under no illusion that there's 100 other agencies trying to do what I do. My main goal was, how do I make this better? How do I just make sure that I can run my ship as efficiently as possible? And so the last 11 months, I've truly felt like that.
And then what was it like to like live in a house with all of us? I'm like almost scared to get this answer.
Yeah, it was good. You always need good people to rely on. And I feel like that's one of the things that I very intentionally like moved to SF for, was that I could, more specifically be closer to you as well, right? Because you are like my first friend in the startup space. And so when it came to even the conversation, right, it was kind of like, because I was at a crossroads where I was still doing some of the nonprofit stuff. And we had a conversation where on the phone you said, hey, at some point you have to like burn the bridges, or like you have 2 balls in your hand. One of them is eventually going to drop. You kind of have to pick which one that's going to be. And so for me, that was just like burning everything else, moving to SF, being around the 1 or 2 people that I actually like, care to actually like listen to or think about, and then just going from there.
And then how do you feel like your outlook on life or like career paths has changed in the last year? Because you've also seen like, dude, I remember in summer, man, like, oh my God, I'd come home. Yeah. I'd come home from like a random trip and I'd be so exhausted. I'd like walk through the door jet lagged. I didn't sleep the night before. And there's just like these 3 dudes on my couch that I'd never seen before sleeping there. Yeah. And I'd seen them before on Twitter. I'd never met them in my life. And somehow they ended up on my couch because one of you guys would invite them over. Yeah. And that happened so much to where, dude, our house was like a hostel. Yeah. Right? Like there were just people coming in and out, especially we were hosting Aleph Batch 0 at that point. And so there are all these people that were coming out to like be part of the batch or to like see people who are in the batch and like check it out. Mm. And summer was rough because there was just so many people and a lot, Yeah. It was just a lot of people. And so I feel like because of that, you've also seen like the full extreme of like, people, career paths, approaches to building. Mm-hmm. How has your outlook on all of it changed?
I have a newfound appreciation for people who work a 9 to 5, because work-life balance definitely is a thing. And for most people, that seems like a very plug-and-play solution into, achieving a good balance, kind of exploring the world, whatever fun you want to have. Because I've seen a lot of people jump into startups, but then not reevaluate the other things in their life, such as who am I hanging around with, where am I spending my time. There definitely takes a certain level of locking yourself in a room and being able to just like work for like 14 hours a day for like months and not expecting anything. And it goes back to what I said in the beginning. I was going into it with the expectation of, okay, even if this fails, what am I going to get out of it? And so there has to be a different level of like, if you're going to build a startup or your own thing, there's going to come a time where you just have to like work, nothing else.
And how did you explain that to like, you know, the friends that you had, like your MCA friends or like your parents, like they were saying, why Ryan, why did you leave us? Why did you forsake us to go to San Francisco with this loser?
Yeah, in the beginning it was definitely a bit weird because people would message and like I just wouldn't respond. But my parents understood. Even up until now, I like if I feel like there's work that needs to be done, I'll straight up tell my parents like, hey, like I'm kind of in a mood. I feel like I need to work today. Is it cool if we meet next week? And they're very supportive of that.
Hey man, you only see your parents so many times in your life. Got to maximize that.
But we got to maximize shareholder revenue.
What are you most excited about in these next like 3 to 6 months?
If you look at where we are today, we've powered some of the biggest consumer apps and some of the coolest companies in the space. And as a recruitment company, we're doing something that no other company has done before. And so it's not just about scaling that, but the larger ecosystem of how do we help companies build out their teams of 6 to 10 people in a multitude of different roles. That's kind of phase one that we already have locked down, and we're just going to continue scaling up. But then over the next few months, I'm largely thinking about how do we unlock the large mass of talent that exists overseas, and they're like 90% there. They want to work at a startup. They're very hungry. The economic opportunity of working with a US-based company is something that interests them, right? But give them the tools so that they can work here, right? And that includes some of my summer plans where I am actually going out to, you know, for a family related matter, but I'm also meeting some of my team because they're all offshore. And a big part of that is also maybe going to visit some of the top universities in that area and then essentially saying, hey, we've done XYZ for these people so far that graduated from your college. Why don't we set up a pipeline such that every single time someone graduates from your college, they have a direct pipeline to US-based companies and startups so that they can work at Founders Arm. And that's truly how we scale up the supply and demand side of things.
All right. And then, you know, I'll ask you the question now that we ask at the end of every episode, which is if we were to do this podcast again in a year, what would you have want to accomplish by then to consider the past year a success?
The VA Factory. That's a big one.
What is
just
the VA Factory?
The VA Factory, 3-4 week pipeline where people who want to work at Founders Arm come in. They are equipped with the latest AI tools, automation softwares, and workflows to essentially superpower them so that they can go off and work with these companies and essentially drive value. Because once we're able to do that, then that company will come back and hire more people through us. And then we're able to find even more people in those regions and then supply them and then so on.
As far I am excited for that. That was one of the biggest things I think I'm excited for, you know, in this next year. But yeah, that is our announcement. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Great.